Welcome, everyone, to our community conversation on the crisis in Israel today. My name is Tom Kahn. I am both a proud member and chair of the Policy Committee at the Jewish Democratic Council of America, JDCA. And welcome again. We are thrilled to have such an incredibly large crowd with such extraordinary guests today. It's been over 100 days since Hamas terrorists brutally attacked Israel on October 7th. And as we continue to watch this conflict unfold, and the news reports recently in the last day are hopeful towards a possible extended ceasefire, we pray for the release of the remaining 130 hostages, the dismantling of Hamas, and of course, the protection of all innocent lives, including Palestinians as well as Jews. As the conflict continues and likely enters a new phase, we want to know what's next. How will the war impact Israeli and American politics? What can we truly expect in terms of the eradication of Hamas? What might Gaza look like the day after? And how realistic is and important is the creation of a future Palestinian state? To answer these critical questions, we are joined by two renowned experts on Israel and the Middle East, Michael Koplow and David Makovsky. Michael Koplow is a friend. He's the chief policy officer of the Israel Policy Forum, and full disclosure, I am a proud board member of IPF. Michael also serves as a senior research fellow at the Kogod Research Center at the Shalom Hartman Institute. Before that, Michael was the founding director of the Israel Institute. He holds a PhD from Georgetown as well as a BA from Brandeis University. He issues a must-read column called the Koplow Column every Thursday. If you don't get it, I highly recommend that you subscribe to it. Michael also got a master's from Harvard University, and he joined us, as many of you probably remember, shortly after the October 7th attack to discuss the crisis in Israel and the U.S. response. And just a few days after that program, Michael went to Israel on a mission with IPF I was privileged to join. We are thrilled to welcome Michael back. To introduce our second guest, I am really delighted to welcome my dear friend, fellow board member, and the extraordinary Policy Committee co-chair, Marcy Orley. Marcy?
Thank you, Tom. David Makovsky is the Ziegler Distinguished Fellow at the Washington Institute and director of the Koret Project on Arab-Israel Relations. He is also an adjunct professor in Middle East Studies at Johns Hopkins University. In 2013-14, he worked in the office of the U.S. Secretary of State, serving as a senior advisor to the Special Envoy for Israeli-Palestinian Negotiations. He's the author of two books, Be Strong and of Good Courage, How Israel's Most Important Leaders Shaped Its Destiny, which he co-authored with Dennis Ross, and the 2009 Washington Post bestseller, Myths, Illusions, and Peace, Finding a New Direction for America and the Middle East. We are thrilled that David has also joined JDCA in the past, and we've all benefited from his expertise. David and Michael, thank you both so much for joining us today. I will now pass it over to JDCA CEO, Haley Soifer, to begin our conversation. Haley?
Thank you so much to Marcy and Tom, and thanks to Michael and David for joining us today. For JDCA, so many Jewish Americans and Americans who care deeply about Israel and every Israeli, events of the past 110 days have been incredibly difficult. Yesterday, 24 members of the IDF were killed in Gaza, the worst single-day loss of life among Israelis since October 7th. And also yesterday, Hamas reportedly had rejected a proposal for a 2-month pause in fighting in exchange for a release of all remaining hostages. Reports indicate there are other proposals for temporary pauses, potentially up to a month, in exchange for the release of hostages. But of course, nothing is final. These are under negotiation. David and Michael, what is the path forward for the hostages, which is, of course, a critically important priority for all of us? And how do ongoing IDF operations in Gaza and the growing death toll, including among members of the IDF, impact prospects for their release? David, we'll start with you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Haley, very much for having me, and Tom, Marcy, everyone. It's a delight to be with you guys again. So thank you very much. Look, I mean, there's the theories out there were one of the prime minister, defense minister, is that more military pressure will yield the hostages to be released. Now, they don't say it'll be that they will find them. There's no Entebbe solution. I saw Gadi Eisenkot did an interview with Ilana Dayan. Gadi is someone I know very well. He's in the war cabinet. His son was killed in the war. His nephew was killed in the war within 24 hours of each other. I was at the Shiva for Gadi. He was a former IDF chief of staff. Him and Benny Gantz are the two centrist parties, one centrist party in the war cabinet. And he said there's no Entebbe way out here, that the hostages are scattered all over Gaza. And we think some are with Mohammed Deif and Yahya Sinwar, the leaders of Hamas. We think in the Khan Yunis area, which is where the fighting is fiercest right now in the south. Israel seems to have encircled Khan Yunis and has given a pathway for innocent Palestinians to go to the Rafah area where the trucks are, the humanitarian aid is. But I think that some would say the fighting will yield to a more flexible stand by Hamas negotiations. We just don't know. There's too many conflicting reports. We do know Brett McGurk of the White House, the president's coordinator for the Middle East, is out there now dealing with Egypt and Qatar. You know, there's been conflicting reports. There was a Reuters story that got people excited yesterday a bit of, you know, a phased approach where the women and older men and, you know, severely injured will be released first. But Hamas wants it linked to an end of the war, and while they stay in power. And that's something that Israel has not accepted. Of the 130 plus hostages, you know, you hear numbers 130, 132, 136, whatever that number is, 28 have been confirmed by the IDF as being dead. Actually, I think the number is far higher. From my meetings last month, Dennis Ross and I had meetings with the senior defense officials and ministers in the war cabinet. But whatever the number is of people alive, every life is a world, and you want to see what can be done. And so the U.S. and Israel are in these talks. There's been a creative idea floated. Could you get Hamas to do what Yasser Arafat did in 1982, where he set sail from Beirut? Now, the counter is clear. You know, Hamas is not Fatah, the mainstream Palestinian group. They want to see themselves as shaheeds, as martyrs, although Sinwar seems adept at making other people martyrs and not himself. And Gaza is not Beirut. Gaza is part of Palestine. So they're not setting sail from Gaza. But let's be clear, it's a negotiation. And every negotiation, every side has got every interest to posture and to put forward, to spin things their way. And we just don't know. I'm just glad the negotiations are back on. I wish they would have been on before. There was over 100 hostages released in November, but since then, there's not been any. So I would hope in the next week or so, it'll become clear how McGurk's mission is working. And if these reports of a phased release of hostages over 1 month or 2 months, if it materializes, there's just, you know, there's a fog out there, and we have to be careful because, like I said, every side has got their interests in spinning things their way. But we do know that there's an intensive effort. The last word I'll say, I'm sorry, I don't want to talk too long, is it's curious to follow what is Qatar doing. And I think, you know, a lot of questions in the Jewish community, you know, given the U.S. has this relationship with Qatar, are they doing everything they can to press Hamas? They're the only group that's funding Hamas. Egypt doesn't fund Hamas. Egypt is broke. So is Qatar really, squeezing and pressing Hamas to the max to get as many hostages out as possible? This is very unclear. at this time. So I'm sorry, Haley, there's more questions than answers, but I just
Well,
feel
don't worry, we have more questions for you as well. So, Michael, over to you. And if you could also reflect a bit on the significance of what occurred yesterday among that, with the loss of 24 IDF soldiers.
I'll echo well, first, thanks, Haley, and thanks to JDCA for setting this up. I'll echo what David said in that obviously there's a lot of uncertainty around all of this, and you certainly have two distinct camps that have developed inside of Israel. One that says the only way to get these hostages back is through negotiations, and we should be prepared to give anything to get them back. With, of course, there are variations within that, and one camp that says only military pressure is going to secure their release. And I agree with David that we don't know, but I'll take a bit of a more skeptical view in the sense that we're now 110 days in, and the IDF has, through military operations, been able to rescue one hostage. The other hostages that have been released have all been through negotiations, and so at least in terms of what we've seen, it certainly doesn't mean that the military aspect of this doesn't matter. I think we all understand that it's important to keep the pressure on Hamas militarily, not only because of the hostages, but for all sorts of reasons. But I also think that there may be more of a zero-sum aspect to this than folks in the Israeli government may want to admit. And I, like David, am very glad to see that negotiations are ongoing. In terms of what happened yesterday with the 24 IDF soldiers that were killed, that's obviously an enormous death toll. And inside of Israel, people have widely noted the fact that the 21 who were killed in the course of the same operation had an enormously varied set of backgrounds, set of commitments, religious commitments. It really was a tapestry of Israeli society, not just Jewish, I should note. There were non-Jewish soldiers, Chayalim, who were killed in that attack as well when an RPG hit a building. So it really gives you a sense of just how much all of Israeli society is indeed pitching in this moment. I do want to say something about the negotiations via Qatar. David rightly points out that the Qataris are the ones who have, at least as far as we can tell, the most leverage over Hamas. But there's also a question about splits within Hamas between the political leadership that is based in Qatar and other places and the military leadership that is still on the ground. And there are reports from Palestinian sources that say that Ismail Haniyeh, who is the putative political head, and Yahya Sinwar, the putative military chief in Gaza, have not spoken in weeks. And I think that there's also a question about, if you get to a deal that is brokered by the Qataris, how much is going to have to go on behind the scenes in terms of internal Hamas politics and internal Hamas deliberations to make sure that that deal is seen through? Because I think that we tend to think of groups as unitary. Hamas certainly is not. And I think that the fractures within Hamas that may have been evident even before October 7th seem to have been deepened now, even when you look at the statements from Hamas political members outside of Gaza about their willingness to enter into negotiations, even statements we've seen from some of them about their willingness to enter the PLO and maybe even engage with Israel, statements that I don't think you'd ever see from someone like Sinwar or Mohammed Deif. So I think that that's worth keeping an eye on as well, not just the negotiations via Qatar, but internal Hamas dynamics in terms of whether the hostages can actually be released. The last thing I'll say is that within Israel, I think there's been a real shift since the immediate aftermath of October 7th. In the immediate aftermath, people were very much more focused on the notion of destroying Hamas entirely. And I think that as time has gone on, while most people still want to see that happen, the plight of the hostages has taken on even greater importance and has had greater visibility. And I expect that that is having an impact as well on the Israeli government's willingness to negotiate and willingness to prioritize the hostages.
Michael, picking up on some of the themes that you just mentioned, the New York Times recently reported that some Israeli military leaders have suggested that Israel's stated goal of eradicating Hamas and securing the release of the hostages may be incompatible. And there's a clear tension between the time it would take to eradicate Hamas and growing pressure on Israel to de-escalate the conflict. If you and David, we'll start with you, Michael, could speak to these dynamics. So can IDF operations continue in Gaza if there's any hope for release of the hostages? Is the destruction of Hamas possible? And what kind of pressure is Israel facing to de-escalate in Gaza?
I do think that tension, of course, exists. And it isn't just about tension between two goals. We're also operating on very different timelines, because when you have 132 hostages and at best 100 of them are still alive, and it may be that fewer of them are alive, you obviously have a clock that's running. And I think we should expect that the hostages who are alive, many of them, of course, were injured in the October 7th attack. Many of them are sick. I'm sure many of them needed medical care from the moment that they were captured, and even if they didn't, they probably need medical care now. So there really is a clock on this. Whereas when you think about what it means to eradicate Hamas, if that's possible, or even to remove Hamas from power in Gaza and significantly deteriorate their capabilities and do what you can to make sure that something like October 7th can't happen again, that's not an instantaneous or quick operation, as I think we're seeing. Israel now has been fighting really since October 7th, and IDF estimates are that of the between 30 and 35,000 fighters that Hamas had when this thing started, IDF estimates are that Israel has killed somewhere between 9,000 and 9,500 of those fighters. And that's obviously with intense military activity. So this is the sort of thing that is going to take time. It's not going to happen. And all the more so because Israel is a democracy. And despite all of the criticisms of IDF operations up until now, it's simply not going to go in and just flatten the entire place without any regard for civilians and who's there. So that also means that this is going to take longer. And so I think these two things are in tension, and it's part of why you're now seeing extra urgency around the idea of hostages. Whereas when we think about the military operation, we see that Israel has already transitioned into a lower intensity phase. And there's been a lot of messaging from both Israeli government officials and IDF officials that people are going to have to dig in. This is going to take a while. And when we think about how long the IDF is going to remain in Gaza, it's not going to be a quick pullout. The 21 IDF soldiers who were killed on Monday, they were in the course of demolishing two buildings that are going to be in what's almost certainly going to be an Israeli security buffer zone. And so you're going to have IDF troops there for a while. It's going to take a long time to accomplish the military goals, whatever those end up morphing into, whereas the issue of the hostages really is on a much more pressing timetable.
Thank you. And David, if you could also please speak to whether the goal of destroying Hamas is feasible, if it's possible.
Right. No, these are good questions. I will say I saw a new poll from people. There's a few polling agencies there I really respect. The Israel Democracy Institute. Some of you know them, Tamar Herman, and they're very reputable. And they just came out with a new poll today that 60% of Israelis, Jews now, but which are about 80% of the population, do not want to stop this war, even if it meant freeing all the hostages. Because they feel it's just too important. The number I saw, Camille Fuchs is another noted pollster on Channel 13 earlier this week, and the number had gone on 35 would stop the war. Now that's of the Israeli public writ large, including the Arab population. If you could get all the hostages out, by the way, would release Palestinian prisoners, all to most. It depends, each one words it a little differently. But what we're seeing is, and it hits to Michael's point of I think there's a growing minority. It's not yet a plurality and not yet a majority, though, of people who would entertain halting the war because of the ticking clock of the hostages. They're saying, okay, they're there 110 days. How much longer can they hold out? So, and we're seeing like a little differences that, for those Israelis on the left side of the spectrum, the number goes a little higher. The center and the right are lower in terms of would support a deal that would end the war. So in terms of public attitude, I'd say there's a growing minority. We're seeing it also if you look at the hostage families and the way they are demonstrating. You know, in the beginning, it was like, these are parallel things, bring them home now. You would see the signs. And then those signs I noticed started morphing to Iska Achshav, meaning a deal now. And now you're seeing, now there was some more disruptive tactics at the Knesset earlier this week, more vociferous demonstrations outside the prime minister's home in Jerusalem and Caesarea. It's emerging from a sense of desperation that how long can these hostages hold out? So this is an excruciating dilemma. I mean, a Hollywood movie could not have done this, you know, Sinwar and death, surrounded by hostages, and Khan Yunis. I mean, one Israeli official said, look, we could drop a bomb on this tunnel, but then we kill our own people. So you don't want to do that. So it's an excruciating dilemma that, you know, that is just beyond imagination. And so there's some very tough trade-offs here, and Michael's right. And that's what I was trying to get at about, you know, the school says military pressure is what works, and others say, no, primacy should go to, you know, to the hostage release. And I see Tom, you know, there's also a note. There's also a question of the prime minister's popularity, which has been very 76% want him to resign since October 7th. Now, a lot of that is not hostage related. It's related to the lack of preparedness. It's on your watch. You're supposed to be Mr. Security and the like. I just think it's we're seeing fluidity in public opinion, I guess is my main point, but that fluidity has not reached yet half of the Israeli public, but it's growing. It's you know, whatever. I saw 16% a month ago. The Channel 13 reports that 35% said stop the war if you can get the hostages out. But it's not yet a majority. But it's something to monitor, to watch. And the question about, Haley, your question about, you know, is it an achievable goal? You know, I would tell people it's not about, you're never going to eradicate Hamas, you know, as an idea. It's in the hearts and heads and minds of people. You're not going to be able to go to every mosque and take away every pistol. The question is, can you take the leadership really and drive the leaders from power and have a more normal government? We in the United States wouldn't want ISIS on our border if they did something as horrific as this. You know, we went thousands of miles into Iraq to eradicate ISIS. That was under the Obama administration. So all I'm saying is this is, and it continued after Obama, of course. But my point is that the goal, it seems to me, is can you drive them from power? It seems to me the military focus on Khan Yunis is like their last big stronghold. Israel has basically taken the north. It's not complete because there are tunnels in the north where 5,000 to 6,000 fighters might be. So yes, all their battalions in northern Gaza, Gaza City has been their headquarters, their apparatus is there, and that has come apart, and Israel has emerged, you know, on top. But, and you know, the tunnels, you don't want to send soldiers into these tunnels where there's booby traps and they could be killed. So it isn't a complete victory in the north. The south is where the focus is now. And all is left is really Rafah, and that's very delicate, Rafah, because that's where a lot of civilians are, near the trucks. There's tent cities, and you don't want to go there. The question for me is this war going to morph if there is a hostage deal, at least let's say for the first half of the hostages? I don't think Hamas has an interest in letting all the hostages out. If they get 2 months for the first batch of women and elderly men and the severely injured, maybe. And does this war, and I'm asking it as a question, I don't claim to know the answer, does it morph into something more like the West Bank, where like Jenin. I mean, Israel has drawn down forces. It doesn't always seem that way given American television, but you had 360,000 reservists after October 7th. Now you're down to under 100,000. Why is that? It's there because of the economy. You want to, reignite the economy. It's also a human limit. I think the last time Israel had such long reserve duty was the 1982 war, and that was 60 days. And here we're at 110 days since October 7th. So there's a limit. And so the numbers have dropped. The nature of fighting is evolving. In the South, there's not as many aerial attacks. Don't misinterpret me. I'm not saying there's not aerial attacks, but nothing on the scope of what we saw in the early days of the war. When you have 2 million people in the South, because Israel tried to get 1 million people to keep them out of harm's way to say, go to the South. Now you have 2 million in the South, one from the North and one from the South, 2 million. So Israel it's more delicate. So can this move in Khan Yunis be decisive, or is this going to be just a war of attrition that'll go much lower intensity? It won't be on the front pages of the newspapers anymore, but it will persist. I think that the morphing of the war, the evolving of the war, is something we really need to think about. But the focus is not on eradicating Hamas writ large. It's on the leadership and making sure that they're driven from power, so you have a chance for somewhat of a post-Hamas Gaza. I'll just say one more sentence of Gadi Eisenkot, who I like to quote, and he just says, anyone who thinks that you can get rid of every last Hamas person it's not real. So Hamas will persist. The question is, what is its power? What's its lethality? How much damage can it inflict on Israel? And do you have a chance of having a new Palestinian partner there? I think as long as Hamas is in power, by definition, you do not.
Discussions about the day after in Gaza involve some combination of an international presence and the possibility of the Palestinian Authority back in Gaza, as well as a U.S. and renewed international push toward a two-state solution. At the same time, the current Israeli government has rejected a two-state solution. So what does the day after look like in Gaza? Could the PA play a role in Gaza? And is a two-state solution still the best and only path to ensuring Israel's future as a democratic and Jewish state? We will start with you, David.
Okay, thanks for giving me the easy ones here.
I promised more questions.
I know. Look, I think, you always want to know from this horrific situation, is there any opportunities that could be created? And maybe you could say, maybe you're optimistic by nature. I try to be realistic. I do think and I was just in the Gulf and the Emirates before I was in Israel. What's changed since October 7th there is that until October 7th, they felt, we've given it the office, don't talk to me anymore about the Palestinians. As one Emirati official said, the only people ask me about Palestinians are Americans, Israelis, American Jews. No Arab asks us about Palestinians, only you guys in America. It was just striking to hear that from a top Arab official. What has changed a bit is that the media coverage there, and not just Al Jazeera, to be fair, but all over, has focused a lot on the devastation. And obviously your heart goes out to any innocent person who dies on any side of this conflict, whether he's an Arab, a Jew, doesn't matter, an Israeli, Palestinian, who cares? But I think the good part here is that the Emiratis and the Saudis are showing that they're willing to put a lot of money into this. But they want to be sure that the people that get the money are not putting it in their pockets. They don't want it to go for corruption. They've had some bad experiences with the PA, and the polling data of Khalil Shakaki, a friend of mine in Ramallah, reflects this, that 80% of Palestinians think it's corrupt. Now, I don't want to give up on the PA. I just feel it's too important. I think it has to be reformed, transformed, reinvigorated, whatever word you want to use. But it needs people who are trustworthy, who would take Gulf money for reconstruction. And I think people like Salam Fayyad and there are a few others. There's a short list of people who have proven track records as builders and building schools, building clinics, building roads. sewage treatment, all the basics of state building. I think they're willing to go back and to go there. And I think that the Gulf will trust them to do it. But they want to know that if they're putting money in and that this will go for, that it won't get bombed another 2 years or 5 years. And so clearly they would like to see, and one of the Emiratis, Haley, was very blunt with me. He said, listen, we're facing a rising tide of political Islam in our country. Some is inspired by Iran. Not everything is. None of us are on the brink. No need to get worried. Everything's fine. But it's not as comfortable as it was before October 7th. So what they would like to see is some commitment on 2 states. Prime Minister, as we know, has come out against it. I think I was on the PBS NewsHour last week, and I said, I think we in America, our messaging could improve a bit here. When we talk about 2 states, we don't talk about what sort of state. I mean, if the Palestinian state was like Costa Rica, I think almost every Israeli would sign up. The problem is the Israelis don't believe that a Palestinian state is Costa Rica. They think it's kind of a mini Iran or North Korea even. Look at all the Hamas indigenous industrial capabilities of rockets and the like that they did on their own, that they didn't even have to smuggle in. So I think somehow we in America have to do a better job in saying this is the kind of Palestinian state we support. That is, that understands Israeli security needs, that recognizes that both sides are indigenous to the Middle East, that is reform-minded and focused on governance. I think we have to be clear. And there's certain Palestinian states we can't support, and this is where we lose Israel, frankly. And I'm just being blunt in this kind of group, that I feel where we lose the Israelis is by us sounding, when it comes to 2 states, whatever the 2 state is, we're for it. They'll say, look what happened in 2007. Hamas outmuscled the PA. They took over Gaza, and they've been in charge from 2007 until today. And so their view is, you get out of the land, you're not more secure, you're more vulnerable. Israel gets out of Lebanon, there's now 150,000 rockets of Hezbollah. It's the main analytical point is that the non-state actors of Hamas and Hezbollah are able to outmuscle the state structures in these places. And so who's going to enforce the deal? Last point on that is just we think of 2006 with the Israeli-Hezbollah war, 1701, which is Hezbollah should not go south of the Litani. There should not be an importing weapons to Hezbollah. But nobody enforced it. So without enforcement, I think 2 states is going to ring hollow, and we're going to lose Israel. So Netanyahu, yes, he's got his own calculations with some of the hard right elements that he's convinced will stay in the government after Gantz and Eisenkot leaves, and he's more solicitous of those hard right because he feels without them he doesn't have a government. But we should say more not just what sort of state we want, but what sort of state we will actively oppose. I think we could have an impact there. I don't want to talk too long. I hope you'll give me another shot at this question by looking at the Biden administration and its efforts the day after to do a Saudi mega deal with Israel, and which has got pieces to it. And part of it is something on the 2 states. And is that a commitment of the U.S. and not a commitment of Israel? The foreign secretary or minister of Saudi Arabia, Farhan, said on Fareed Zakaria on Sunday, we just want a clear, irreversible step to 2 states. In other words, we're not asking for 2 states. We just want to know you're taking a step towards it. So what is that precisely? I think we need to clarify. So I think it's more a process, but an unmistakable process. And anyway, I'm sorry, this is a complicated issue, and I apologize.
Oh, I know. We appreciate your insight. Michael, do you want me to repeat the question?
I think I got it. So
yeah, day after 2 states.
So I'll start with your second part on 2 states, because that's the easiest question that exists out there, at least for me, which is, yes, 2 states is the only way for Israel to have a secure Jewish and democratic future, and there should be no question about that. But whether the United States should be pushing that right now, I think that's the more relevant question. And I agree with David that U.S. messaging could and should be different. I think that we have a tendency to get lost in Netanyahu, particularly after last weekend when Netanyahu came out and said security control is not compatible with the Palestinian state. And then He and Biden spoke the next day for the first time in almost a month. And then Biden came out and said, well, Netanyahu didn't say no Palestinian state or no two states. There are, some that he can live with. And then Netanyahu went back on Twitter and contradicted what Biden said, and then issued a video the next day that's kind of sort of walked back his tweet. But it's not just, so we focus on Bibi, and as if there was a different prime minister, then all this would be swept away. And I have to tell you, anybody who has been to Israel since October 7th or spoken to Israelis since October 7th knows that one of the quickest ways to turn them off is to talk to them about a Palestinian state. They don't want to hear it, and it's not just Netanyahu, and it's not just Israelis on the right. So I think that two states absolutely has to be the end goal for the United States. We should not drop that at all in any substantive way. But to talk about two states now and hold the Israelis' feet to the fire and force them to commit to it, and as if it's right around the corner or even possible in the near term or medium term, I think that's the mistake. And so that goes to the first part of your question about what the day after looks like in Gaza. And there's going to have to be a Palestinian Authority role, but we need to think about sort of the transition to the day after. And I think there are three important components that we need to be thinking about. There's security, there's humanitarian provision, and there's basic governance. And there's going to be a PA role in some or maybe even all of these. But I don't think it's going to look like just bringing the PA back into Gaza. A, because that's not palatable among Israelis. B, because the Palestinian Authority itself is in no shape at the moment to just roll into Gaza and start running the place. And C, because we here in the United States, and obviously the Israelis as well, have been talking for years about the need for Palestinian Authority reform and all of the things that the Palestinian Authority needs to do, not only to satisfy the Israelis and not only to satisfy us, but to satisfy Palestinians who look at the PA and find it deeply corrupt and deeply ineffective and in many ways deeply illegitimate. So talk about having the PA just roll into Gaza tomorrow, I think is as much of a non-starter as saying two states tomorrow. But as I said, I think there will be a Palestinian role, and a lot of that has to do with the fact that you have these PA employees and PA personnel in Gaza who have been there since the Hamas takeover in 2007. And when we think about security, for instance, we have this wonderful, effective office called the U.S. Security Coordinator in Jerusalem, currently run by General Mike Fenzel. They are in charge of training and equipping the PA security forces in the West Bank. And they believe that there are about 6,000 PA security forces in Gaza right now who have been there since 2007, who can, over the next year, be trained and serve as the basis for a security force inside of Gaza. And if something like that is successful, it means that while you have the IDF in Gaza now, you can have phased withdrawals from certain places where you move in these PA forces that are trained by the US and others, and over time have them take more responsibility. The same goes for things like governance, where even now, when water infrastructure or electricity infrastructure is repaired in Gaza since October 7th, that's being repaired by Palestinian Authority employees who in Gaza, even since 2007, have been running the water authority and have been running the electricity authority. So I think the way to think about this isn't, no PA or yes PA. The way to think about this is leverage the PA presence that is in Gaza right now, which falls well short of PA control of Gaza. Figure out who is there that can start to take over some of these responsibilities that Israel shouldn't be doing and doesn't want to be doing, in the medium term and certainly not in the long term. Figure out how you can get some sort of transitional administration in Gaza that involves PA employees that are there, that involve Gaza residents, that involve people who served in a even Hamas bureaucracy but are not Hamas members and have no connections to terrorism and violence. Figure out how you can integrate all of these parts together, and that will require the US quarterbacking the process to have some sort of transitional arrangement. And in the meantime, work on PA reform, work on getting buy-in from the region, and hopefully 3 to 5 years from now, you will have the Palestinian Authority running things in Gaza, but it will look like a different, more legitimate reformed Palestinian Authority. Without something like that, to be very blunt and stark, Israel is going to be left with a full-blown occupation of Gaza with nobody coming in to save them, having to provide law and order, having to provide all the humanitarian assistance, having to run things on a day-to-day basis. That will be a nightmare for Palestinians in Gaza. It will be a nightmare for Israel. And the United States, which it is, but just to emphasize this, needs to be working on this day and night to avoid that as being the inevitable thing that happens if we don't get this right pretty quickly.
I'll just add, if I could, one second, just to reinforce Michael's point, because I agree with every word, is that you think of, let's say, the Minister of Health is in Gaza is a Hamas minister, but it doesn't mean that the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth tier civil servants, bureaucrats, whatever, in the health ministry are all Hamas people. And frankly, I think COGAT, the IDF Liaison Office Coordinator for Government Activities in the Territories, is the acronym COGAT. They know a lot of these people, and I think that there are already relationships behind the scenes. And I think to use existing apparatuses is crucial, even in municipal structures. We keep thinking of Hamas at the top. It doesn't mean that every civil servant is Hamas. And you've got to use existing structures. I mean, I saw some crazy idea that you're going to use like clans or warlords, that just is going to turn Gaza into Somalia. And the IDF is clear where it stands on this. It wants it, and Defense Minister Gallant, to his credit, even said a strong PA is in the interest of Israel. So I think using existing structures of civil servants is going to clearly morph in the direction of the PA. The PA doesn't want to come into Gaza on the back of an Israeli tank, but I think you've got to use the structures, and if you can have this Gulf money and have governance led by like a Fayyad, Rami Hamdallah, there's a few of these guys, there's not many, but a few. I think that is the only way to go. We should definitely not even think about warlords and clans and all this stuff. That just is the worst idea possible, it seems to me.
Okay, well, turning back to Washington, Michael, you mentioned aid. Looking at Congress specifically, we recently have seen some calls for conditioning U.S. aid to Israel. What is your view of dynamics in Congress related to aid, and what has been the impact of the now 3-month delay within Congress of fulfilling President Biden's October 20th pledge of $14.3 billion in emergency military assistance to Israel, as well as additional U.S. humanitarian assistance for the Palestinians?
Did you want me to start, Haley? I'm sorry.
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay. So I think that money is crucial. It's crucial to protect Israelis. It's crucial for Israeli security. A huge chunk of the proposed $14 billion is for things like Iron Dome and David Sling and Iron Beam, which is the more experimental anti-rocket system they have that uses laser beams. I think it's really important that money go. I think it's also important to note that without that, the United States has been sending its own stores of weapons to Israel, and so in many ways, this is about replenishing American weapons that impacts our safety and security as well. When you look at dynamics inside of Congress, it's very clear that there are members of Congress who are getting frustrated with Israel. I think that in many ways that frustration is understandable. I also think that we should be clear-eyed about what's actually going on. What's actually going on is that the Biden administration obviously wants to see this $14 billion package passed yesterday. You had an amendment last week that would have potentially suspended all security assistance to Israel, and it only got 11 votes in the Senate. You have other efforts that want to reiterate that Israel needs to comply with existing U.S. law, and even that effort as well, I think at the moment has 18 people on it. So we're not talking about an overwhelming number of senators. So I think that on balance, the United States clearly wants to continue supporting Israel's security. And I think that is really important to do. A, because Israel is an important ally. B, because Israelis are still feeling incredibly insecure in the wake of October 7th. still feeling literally shell-shocked. And I don't think that right now is the time to send a message to Israel that says we don't support your safety and security, especially as Hamas is still in Gaza, is still shooting rockets, and there are 132 approximately hostages still being held. Where I think that Israel could be doing perhaps a better job, and this is where I'd rather see the administration and Congress push Israel on, is on humanitarian assistance to Gaza and figuring out how to eliminate some of the bottlenecks, not necessarily for the amount of things that are going in, because you now have about 250 trucks a day going in, and certainly there could be more, but that's not an insignificant amount. I think that the real effort now should be on figuring out how Israel, and not only Israel, but the UN as well, can work better together to make sure that once that assistance goes into Gaza, that it gets where it needs to go. Because at the moment, that's actually the real challenge. It's not getting aid to the border and inspecting it. It's making sure that once it crosses over, that you don't have all sorts of logistical hurdles that prevent it from going around. So that is where, when we're having a conversation about assistance, I think that is the better and more productive and frankly more impactful conversation to be having than talking about different ways in which we can cut off or put new conditions on security assistance to Israel, which is extremely necessary in this moment.
And David, looking at the administration now, President Biden has stood strongly with Israel in the aftermath of October 7th. He has refused calls for a ceasefire. The administration has not been calling for restraint. Instead, they've strongly supported Israel's security, its right to self-defense, and its goal of destroying Hamas. So how do you assess the work of the administration in the past 110 days in support of Israel's security in an effort to release the hostages? And since you mentioned it earlier, and it sounded like you want to discuss it again, what is this possible Saudi mega deal which you referenced, and what is the administration's role there as well?
Okay, I think President, there's certain moments in Israeli history that I could think of where there's a unique bond with the people of Israel and an American president. I remember when Bill Clinton met with high school students in 1996 when there were 4 bombs went off in 9 days, and Israel was really rattled by that. And he somehow connected with the people of Israel. King Hussein, I remember in the 90s, there was a terrible incident of a deranged Jordanian gunman that shot these schoolgirls, and the king came over and he knelt down in Beit Shemesh before the families to apologize. And it was just this moment that was indelibly linked, really seared into Israeli history. I think we're in the middle of such a moment now where we'll look back 50 years from now and say, remember Biden? Remember within days of October 7th, he came. And, I'm not overstating, but I think in some ways he's seen as almost the father of the country, that he's really viewed as someone who cares about Israelis. And you'll see billboards on the Ayalon, Tel Aviv highway, "Thank you, Mr. President," in English. Or I saw a right-wing commentator on Channel 14, like the Fox News of Israel, basically saying Ashamnu, Bagadnu, the mea culpa that you say on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, saying, I should never have doubted you, Mr. President. So I think there's a public sense, and there's a colleague of mine, Hanin Radar, who follows the social media in Lebanon. And she said, David, it was amazing. If you look at October 7th till the Biden visit, it was all, we're in this fight. This is our fight. Axis of resistance, mukawama, resistance, it's us. As soon as Biden came and brought the aircraft carrier off the Mediterranean coast, so Iron Dome in the north could not be overwhelmed by Hezbollah, she said it was like a light switch. The chatter in Lebanon of the Shia and the shifted dramatically. It was like, hey, this isn't our war. This is Hamas's war. They didn't consult with us. It was the idea of having an American military presence off the Mediterranean coast was huge. So I think the president is really connected with the people of Israel, and he has stood fast every Israeli now is aware of the pressure points from certain progressive elements in the Democratic Party, that they feel he's really stood fast. They feel he's really paid a domestic price, and there's a real deep appreciation for this president. Now, how does it link to the Saudi deal? Or where does it go from here for this administration? It's clear that they would like a hostage deal that would let out, the Hamas leadership leave. I don't know if that's attainable. We talked about it, but I think the goal is to have an off-ramp and a point where the Biden administration, the president himself wants this, the prime minister wants it, the Saudi leadership wants it, this mega deal, which would be, would have, like, let's say, 3 core elements. One element is a Saudi-U.S. defense treaty. It's clear the Saudis believe they're not part of NATO. Under Trump, they hit Aramco. The Iranians did, and no one did anything. Trump didn't do anything for the Saudis. So their view is like, we need America. We don't trust this president, that president. They change over every 4 years. We want something in American law. But a treaty requires 2/3 of the Senate. Haley, you worked in the Congress. I don't think there's been a military defense treaty since Japan in 1960. It was a different America then. And I think the U.S. saying is, look, you want us to do something for you. We want to break through with Israel. This is like the Super Bowl. This is the World Cup. This is the World Series all wrapped together. If Saudi Israel has a breakthrough, and I think part of October 7th, frankly, of Hamas's calculations was, we have to do something so outrageous that it ends this momentum, because it was going this way before October 7th. It's clear that the Saudis, in keeping what we said earlier in the conversation, they want something in the direction of 2 states. As Michael said correctly, this isn't the time for a 2-state thing, given all the trauma and the like, but something in that direction. So can you put those 3 elements together? I'll say one thing, only the president can do this. And ironically, if you don't believe me, believe a guy by the name of Lindsey Graham is his name. I think some of you heard of him. A staunch supporter of Israel from South Carolina. He said only Biden could pull this off, because we think if Trump is president, you won't get that many Democrats for a Saudi-U.S. defense treaty. But this is a Nixon goes to China moment. Only a Democrat can pull off this grand deal. So is it possible? It seems like a different world, but I'm telling you, the people in the White House, they really want this. I'm not here predicting their success. I want to be very careful, but I do think they're going to make their best effort to pull this apart. This would be a huge strategic achievement for the United States. I think in terms of marginalizing China in the Middle East, which has been something this president cares about. And it would be a huge feather in his cap during an election year too, but it comes from his kishka, it comes from his gut. This is someone who I think has devoted his professional life to a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. So I'm not here predicting success, but I think it's worth following. And if I could just throw in a commercial, I know we're at the end. I just want to, it's again an honor to be with you and with Michael and really great people. I try to tweet a little bit about this. So those of you go on social media at David Makovsky. I even had to go on Instagram, although I don't know how to use it. I have a research assistant who helps me. But I do try daily to if there's some value added thing or an article that I think people should come to people's attention. But, people say, do you have hope? Do you have faith given at the darkest hour? And I somehow do have some hope and faith. I guess I wouldn't be in this if I didn't. I believe in the resilience of the people of Israel. I look at the IDI number, 88% of Israeli Jews feel the country has really rallied in terms of the resilience. Even a majority of Arab Israelis, and those people also, 70% of Israeli Arabs said they identify more with the state than they did before October 7th. So I believe that ultimately Israel's will to live is greater than its enemies' will to die. I think, and therefore, the most fundamental sense, when you say Am Yisrael Chai, I think it's literally true. And the country is united. If Hamas thought that Israel's weak because of the demonstrations over judicial reform, they totally miscalculated Israel, because Israel is rallying in a crisis. And the same judicial reform demonstrators, they're the people who help bring people to reserve duty, and the country's coming together in the most beautiful way. So I wouldn't, I think there's definitely some hope.
Thank you so much, David. And Michael, we have to hear from you for a moment. Also, if you have any, if you want to leave us with some hope as well, it would be much appreciated after what is a difficult discussion this hour. Any reasons for hope?
So first of all, I'm into everything that David just said. And yes, I do think there are reasons for hope. I think that Israel is going to turn a corner. I think that while of course we all wish that the hostages were all home now, and we all wish that Hamas was gone now, and it's going to be a long slog. I think that this is going to be a moment over the next few months for Israel to really heal from the divisions that it was experiencing before October 7th. I really am hopeful that we will see more hostages return. And I think that Israelis are going to turn the corner. And as always, it's more optimistic to see people rebuilding things than it is to see people tearing things down. And there's going to be a lot of rebuilding going on, not only in Gaza and among Palestinians, but among Israelis who are going to slowly return to their communities in the south. And hopefully we'll also return, it's a whole separate conversation, but hopefully at some point we'll also return to communities in the north. I think that some of the political divisions that we've seen are not going to be quite as stark as they were before October 7th. And I think that Israel is absolutely going to move forward. And I hope to a better place. And we should all support Israel in its efforts to do that, and support what the administration is doing in its efforts to both get Israel to a better place, but also get Palestinians to a better place and really improve their situation too.
Well, thanks to you both for sharing your insight, your expertise. We're extremely grateful. I would now like to invite Bobby Saferstein, our Senior Director for Programming and Public Engagement, to talk a little bit about upcoming events for JDCA. Bobby.
Thank you, Haley. And thank you to Michael Koplow and David Makovsky, and to each of you for joining us today. At the Jewish Democratic Council of America, we'll continue to monitor the situation as news of a possible pause, the return of the more than 130 remaining hostages in Hamas's captivity, and of any potential agreements for an end to the war develops and unfolds. As difficult as it is right now, and as unimaginable as it may seem, there will come, perhaps very soon, a day after. And as we heard today, it will be up to each of us to think boldly and be active partners in shaping what that looks like. Please visit jewishdems.org to learn about all of the ways you can join us, such as signing up for our programs and events, joining a state chapter or affiliate made up of grassroots volunteers, becoming a JDCA member, and by supporting programs like these. As we look to the 2024 general election, our charge is more important than ever to elect a House majority that will support President Biden's agenda and, of course, to re-elect President Biden and Vice President Harris. To that end, we hope you will join one of our upcoming weekly phone banks for New York's 3rd Congressional District's special election on February 13th. Please visit the link in the chat to sign up. We're also offering on-demand phone banks for your convenience. And next Friday, February 2nd at 11 a.m. Pacific Time, 2 p.m. Eastern, please join JDCA and our California chapters and affiliates as we host our California Democratic Senate Primary Issues Forum. We'll be joined by all 3 Democratic Senate primary candidates, Representatives Barbara Lee, Katie Porter, and Adam Schiff, who will have an opportunity to address the issues driving Jewish voters to the polls, including defending democracy, protecting abortion rights, combating anti-Semitism, and supporting Israel's security. You can find the link in the chat. Thank you again for joining us. Stay safe, stay strong, stay engaged, and take action. We'll see you again soon.